Hello and welcome to the Exponential Australia Church Leaders Podcast. We are delighted that you have joined us today as we continue to hear from a wide range of church planting leaders from both around the globe, but also in our own backyard. And today we are joined by one of those, particularly as we are now just a couple of weeks out from our Exponential Australia National Conference on the Gold Coast, August 6 and 7. Make sure you jump on today to register for that. We'd be absolutely delighted that you would join us. But we are joined by one of our keynote speakers in the form of Pastor David Storer, based in Perth. David, it is wonderful to have you on the podcast today.
Delighted to be a part of it. Absolutely.
So great. Well, of course, you're going to be joining us in just a couple of weeks on the Gold Coast. And I'd love for you to start, David, just by telling us some of your journeys up until today. We're going to jump into HarvestNet and we're going to jump into your heart for church planting. And just for context for our listeners today, for those who may have been with us on the Gold Coast 2 years ago, where Pastor Joel Chalaya beautifully spoke of what was seeded and imprinted in him by a senior leader who backed him, supported him, cheered him on. I just needed to say up front in this conversation, Pastor David, that was you. And so just for context for our listeners today, we are so glad to have someone on the podcast and joining us at conference who has had a longitudinal love for church planting in Australia and supporting and releasing leaders. And so it's going to be a great privilege to have you. But firstly, tell us a bit about yourself, where you've been based, some of your journey to date.
Okay, well, I'm the proud father of 7 children, 5 daughters, 2 sons, 1 wife.
Amazing.
Just a quick sweep. I wasn't raised in a Christian family, so I came to Christ in my 20s. I was living a bit of a hippie lifestyle, had a power encounter with Jesus in a backpackers hostel. My salvation experience is I had just been arguing with the Jesus people, like the hippies who become Christians. And so I went back and I thought, I wonder why was I arguing with them so much? So my prayer was, Jesus, if you're there, come into my life and change me. Well, he obviously was, because I felt this power come, touch me on the top of the head, moves from my body. And I knew it was loving me and forgiving me. And that was my experience. I had no church upbringing at all. And so I went back to the Jesus people. They discipled me. And then my first church that I got involved with was back then called the Assemblies of God, now the ACC. And maybe 5 months after that experience, I went to Bible college in Townsville. And then we were told in Bible college, you're all going to be church planters.
Wow.
And so I started getting involved with church planting in country North Queensland. Billawheeler, Charters Towers, and then we moved south into New South Wales, pioneered a church in Swansea, Newcastle, and then down into Victoria. We were in country Victoria and a more established church then, and then made our way across to Perth and took over a church, and it grew to a certain size. And then from that church, we started planting out other churches, autonomous churches, not campuses, and that became HarvestNet. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I want to talk in detail about HarvestNet, but before we get to that, David, I'd love to, obviously you had a genesis in church planting. You said from Bible college, you heard that that's what you're all going to do. You're a prolific church planter in all those different towns that you just listed, but particularly as you stepped into the leadership of a larger church in Perth, obviously there would have had to be some sort of, whether it be epiphany or heart realization that you wanted to be a church planting church, that you wanted to be a leader that raised and sent out church planters. Could you kind of talk to behind the scenes or internally what was going on for you as you developed that heart for church planting around Perth that would then turn into HarvestNet?
Okay, well, honestly, it was part of it would have been, if ever I get the chance, I'm going to start a church planting I'm going to plant churches that plant other churches.
Wow.
Partly due to the fact that back then, that would have been early 80s, our movement was sort of learning how to do it. It was more like charge the machine guns and count the dead and wounded later. And I'm not bitter about that. I'm just saying that's where the genesis of, you know what, if ever I get the chance, I'm going to do this really differently rather than just get out there, make it happen. And so that really was the heart behind HarvestNet, creating the dream of, okay, let's do this well. Let's plant well. Let's encourage. Let's identify great church planters. Let's support them. That's really where it came from. So I don't want to sound like it came from this almost bitterness of, hey, I'm going to... when I got to Perth, the church really took off. It started to grow. And I definitely remember sitting in a board meeting where we had a choice of, are we going to move, buy a bigger block of land and build this ginormous building, or are we going to plant other churches all around church? And that probably was another component to what actually happened. Was I realized then that the Lord was tapping me on the shoulder saying, that's not my plan. I don't want you building. Now, the church was large, but we were thinking of, going into a lot of debt, multiple millions of dollars, massive building, car park, and the Lord saying, no, that's not the way I want you to go. I want you to start planting out other churches. Yeah.
Wow. And David, was that purely the Holy Spirit speaking to you, or did you have any other models that you were looking at or people that you were looking up to in that season, or was it purely just you felt like the Lord had made it very clear to you as a church leader, we are going to be a church planting church?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pushing my memory a bit here, but I can't remember there being any model that I thought, oh yeah, let's try that. It was more inspired by how would I like to have been treated, and that's probably where the model came from. To be honest, is how we went about HarvestNet. Uniquely releasing people from our own congregation, promoting that, taking up an offering, releasing them. And then that church knowing that in a short period of time, when we plant the next church, they are expected to also contribute.
That's great.
So it became like a big snowball rolling down the hill, because the more churches we planted, the more resource was coming from the existing church plants towards the new church plant. So it became quite a unique model. I mean, to my knowledge, I wasn't modeling it on anything else at the time.
That's great. I love that. Yeah. No, it's so encouraging, David, and particularly, obviously we want to see churches around Australia grow, and yet also we want to see churches around Australia multiply. And just to kind of hear that was obviously a conviction that you experienced from the Holy Spirit, also recognizing that even around Australia now, across all different denominations, we know that there's lots of different churches, maybe in the second seat or kind of in youth ministry or wherever they might be serving, that have a church in them, and the Lord might be beginning to call them, as you say, to be sent out and to be planted from the church they're part of. And I think one of the things that I've always admired so much about you, David, from afar, is that you have this amazing kind of collection of what you would describe as spiritual sons and daughters that you've invested deeply into, that have gone on to plant and lead great churches that are then again planting and leading great church. There's a multiplication effect that's happened in many of the leaders that you've been, I guess, a spiritual father to or an ongoing pastor of. I wonder if you could speak to, and again, this is kind of harking back on some of your memory, but how were you able to identify some of those leaders? Was it purely a proximity thing? Do you see something in them? I know a big passion of yours is raising up church plant. How were you doing that in ministry back then?
Yeah, I started a thing called Joshua Generation, whereby I observed rough diamond leaders, and I took them and mentored them for 12 months, met with them once a week. Then if I preached somewhere, I'd take them with me, involve them in praying with people, etc., and so on. So I call it Joshua Generation because Joshua was mentored by Moses. A lot of people hear Joshua generation. Oh, yeah, they're the generation of the promised land. No, that wasn't the thinking. The thinking was Joshua was intentionally mentored by Moses. And that was so every one of the church planters and everyone that now are active in ministry at some point of time would have been a part of our Joshua generation.
Wow, that's incredible. So it was deeply intentional. It was investing in them, and I guess not just for the sake of your home church, but recognizing that at some point they would go out and plant.
Yeah, that was my dream. In fact, I was the one instigating. They weren't knocking on my door. I was knocking on theirs saying, hey, I really think there's a church in you.
That's great.
Joel probably could tell the story. He called him into my office and at first they think, don't you want me around? Are you getting rid of me? And it's like, no, it's not like that. I just think there's a church in you and it's time.
That's great.
We got it out.
It's great. Yeah, one of the things that Dave Ferguson, who's the founder of Exponential globally, often uses this line of, how do we have an I see in you conversation with someone? So I see something in you that they are yet to see in themselves. And I just think you're like a living example of that, particularly when you think of Pastor Joel and Pastor Ken and others who have gone on to plant churches that have in effect helped form the foundation of HarvestNet. And I'd love, even for a bit now, David, for you just to talk about where did HarvestNet come from? Of course, some of us may have heard of HarvestNet through Joel at our last conference or looked it up online. How did that kind of come into existence? You guys first planted in Easter 2004, if I'm right, and it then has had this snowball effect on others planting and them planting again in turn.
When you say where did it come from, how do you mean?
So when you guys first planted in Easter 2004, and it was the first plant was Centerpoint, am I right?
No, it was Nations. It was
amazing, incredible. So when you guys first helped plant Nations or be a part of sending out nations to be planted, did you think that was going to be it? Or did you always have in your heart that we are going to become a network that plants churches?
Yeah, I always did have it, it was building the plane as you're flying it, to be honest. It wasn't like, we got all this work to. In fact, Ken and Joel would still joke about that now, of probably their frustration of working with me, that it became very apparent we were sort of making it up as we went along.
Wow.
But I guess that's part of my nature. I would call myself an intuitive leader. That and it was very much a relational structure, and we've kept it that way. Really, that was the mortar and the bricks. Was not so much rules and regulations, policies. That sort of had to get put in place once we got bigger and bigger and bigger. But in the early days, it was just a very relational model, but intentionally sitting down, talking about, in your congregation, Ken, or in your congregation, Joel, are you identifying a church planter? Who's our next church plant? That was a normal coffee conversation for us. And that was,
I think that's brilliant, David. I think there's even something to pick up on there for our listeners, and for, of course, some of our listeners are church planters, they're church leaders, potentially even denominational leaders, to always have at the front of our mind, who is the next church planter? It is this kind of multiplication mindset of, it doesn't stop with me, but how is this being passed on? Yeah,
look, there's a couple of things. I'll probably bring them up at the conference, but I think having a kingdom mindset is critical. I think the reason why some people struggle to release leaders or people is they struggle with a lack of kingdom understanding. So probably that was you're helping me now by asking me these questions. That was another probably critical shaping revelation that I got as I really got the kingdom of God. It just hit me how it worked, and that's what we're building. That's what we're a part of, and that's why it's so open-handed and releasing. Why wouldn't it be any other way? It's all building the one kingdom. And that absolutely became more than just an idea. It became a huge driving revelation, and hence the way that we planted was very releasing. I think having a kingdom mindset, looking back now, was also a key component to building a church planting network. Yeah.
So great. Well, I want to celebrate that with you and with the many others who have played their role in HarvestNet because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as of 2025, HarvestNet has helped plant 15 churches that now operate across 27 locations across Western Australia.
Yeah, no, I think I handed over to Joel when it was about 9. So I'm so delighted to see Joel's continued leadership, and now involving Peter as well. So that, Peter got saved in our church, and he went when it came time to plant Centrepoint, Joel's church. Peter went with him, so he was there from the get-go. So it's just so delightful for me to just see these people he was a Joshua generation. Peter was a part of Joshua generation, as well as delightful wife. And so, and do I honestly cheer them on? Absolutely. It's a genuine thrill that I have.
And I think you've just named a wonderful example in someone like Peter that, that's the reason why we plant churches, right? To see the lost saved, to see them step into leadership and to pass it on and to go and plant churches and be part of what the Lord is clearly continuing to do through HarvestNet. I think there's just a wonderful picture of the Great Commission in action.
Yeah, well, it breaks the glass ceiling. I mean, imagine if Joel was still my youth pastor or something, because that's what he was. And then, Ken was my worship director, nations. And Peter, well, I don't know if Peter would have ever risen to where he is now. But church planting breaks that glass ceiling. Yes. I already had a team. I already had, so where can the up and coming leadership gifts go if we don't perpetually start planting out new congregations, new churches? Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. David, one of the things, and I know I'm harking back to HarvestNet, but of course it's been a significant part of your ministry, but one of the, I guess, core convictions that I heard you say earlier and is still part of HarvestNet today is this conviction that they want to plant churches that plant churches. So it doesn't stop with the one church. And you're really, in effect, talking about starting movements, starting like something that would have a movement mentality. It wouldn't stop with one thing. And I remember at another time where I first heard you share some of this, you also used, and I don't want to bring up an old analogy, but I'm sure it'll come to your mind quite quickly, use this analogy of an apple and the potency within an apple. I wonder if you would kind of speak to that a little bit and the potential that each and every person has to go on sharing the gospel.
Yeah, well, within the apple is the seeds of multiplication. And those seeds need to be planted, otherwise they remain dormant. So you can have this one great, glorious apple, but within that apple is a crying desire for it to be multiplied, for it to go, and so that there's the perpetuation. That if you kept it as an apple, it will have its moment of glory, but it'll start to decay after a while. and that's the end of it. But if you took the seeds within that apple, that church, so I think that's part of my thinking too. I'm very organic in my thinking that I believe that within every congregation, if we use the apple analogy, then there's seeds around here somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
If this is genuinely born as a living fruit, then all fruit, in some degree, to my knowledge, have that ability to regenerate themselves. That one, has its moment, but the success really is that it continues to multiply and perpetuate new life out of that apple. I'm pretty sure that would be the analogy that I saw. So, I think Jesus used a lot of organic illustrations of how the kingdom works. And so with all of our doing and structuring and thinking, which I'm sure we'll talk about at the conference, we can't deny there's a God factor here.
Yes.
Like that parable where Jesus said, the man sows the seed, he waters it, but then it starts to spring up and he knows not how. So he's done his part, but he's taken this seed, and to his amazement, there's life unfolding. I believe that, we can go so far with our planning, thinking, but we've got to realize this is the will of God. And there's a God factor here that we should expect to see demonstrated.
Yeah, it's good. No, that analogy very much stuck with me when you used it, David. So I appreciate you bringing that back up for our listeners. There's two more questions that I'd love to ask you. One about, we'll finish with one related to conference and just what you feel like the Lord might be brewing in you to share around our theme of greater, and that we would do greater works, than even Jesus would do. But the one that I want to ask you now is particularly related to the inner life of a leader. I know that's something that, as I've listened to some of your messages online and some of your teaching, that's something that you're quite passionate about, the inner life of a leader. And particularly for those who are in the trenches out there wanting to tell people about the kingdom, sometimes we can really neglect the inner life and neglect, even our own healing and wholeness. I wonder if you just take a moment to talk about that, particularly as we're wanting to plant great churches, but if we're gaining the world and losing our soul, we want to be the types of leaders that are healed and whole.
Yeah, well, you'll probably need to rein me in here because that's become probably my life message, apart from obviously church planting, and it's grown out of the fact of over 40 years now of active church ministry and watching so many casualties, not through lack of gift, but through lack of character. But relating back to church planting, there's two things I think that really cripple and choke, the multiplication we want to see. And one is, I've already referred to, a lack of kingdom understanding. The other is ego. Ego just gets in the way. EGO, edging God out, is what I say. And the ability to release and celebrate. Some people struggle, one, because of a lack of kingdom understanding, but two, their ego forbids it. There's a reason why I think Jesus said, if you want to be my disciple, you must deny yourself, take up your cross. There's not too many things that Jesus said must about, but why aren't we taking more notice of? He said must, and the self that he's talking about there, I teach, it couldn't be the God self that we've been given. Why is Jesus telling us to deny ourself? He must be talking about our persona, our ego, our false self, because otherwise, why would God give a self and then say you must deny it? So I think Jesus is saying, listen, if you don't get your ego out of the way, it'll turn every good godly thing into self-gratification. And without getting into preaching mode, I think tragically we see many people in church leadership who are utilizing so many aspects of it for self-gratification instead of kingdom multiplication. Yeah. But I'll rein myself in there. And,
I love it, David. You're a breath of fresh air, and I definitely appreciate some of your comments there, of which I'm sure there will be more opportunity for that at conference. But the last question that I'd like to ask is, like I said, with reference to conference, and particularly as we approach this theme of greater, knowing that the Lord has a great commission that he's entrusted to the church to be a part of, taken to, obviously churches, leaders and cities. And I just wonder, particularly as you approach conference, and as we are delighted that you've accepted the invitation to be a keynote speaker, just what you feel like the Lord might be beginning to lay on your heart, without giving away your keynote, but what the Lord might be beginning to lay on your heart.
I'll definitely talk about some of the stages I went through in the hope and go into more detail about that and what's involved, kingdom, ego, wholeness. But one aspect, perhaps maybe more towards the workshop, is I don't think it's an original thought to me, but I've sort of developed it, is the idea that we have explorers, pioneers, and developers. And sadly, a lot of our conferences are geared towards developers. In other words, there's an existing church and you're just growing what's something that's been handed to you, etc., and so on. Yeah. We don't have, thankfully, Exponential is one, where all the main focus is on pioneering, church planting. But also, I'd like to, spend a little bit more time talking about explorers, because I think we need to value the fact that been there, done that, church as we always know it, we could get stuck. We need explorers. What are explorers doing? They're going in the road less traveled. They're thinking new ways to reach people. Because what are we talking about? We're reaching the lost, right? And so I think the value of people who are willing to explore new models and more different ways to be reaching out. I think it's worthwhile bringing up, kicking it around because I'm sure there will be some people that will really resonate with them, that explorer aspect of, otherwise we just got this, every time we talk about church planting, we've got what we know, right? The explorers, they're getting out there, looking at new models, new way of reaching people. So on. And so possibly in the workshop more, I'll be breaking down that in the hope that, we can really trigger some people that realize, wow, this is also a time not only for church planting, but exploring new ways of reaching people for Christ. Yeah.
It's great. Well, David, that's very much in line with our heart, and we long to see new innovative ways of reaching people that will in turn turn to new churches that we haven't even conceived or thought of yet. So we're so delighted that you're beginning to feel the Lord stirring in that, and we can't wait to have you with us on the Gold Coast on the on the 6th and the 7th of August. And just again, another friendly reminder to our listeners, make sure you're able to jump online. And we can't wait to have David and our other keynote speakers and workshop hosts with us. David, thank you so much for being with us today.
Been a pleasure. God bless everyone.